Hello, I'm Matthew. I'm an internationally recognized florist and designer, and I teach my techniques to make world-class floristry. Today, welcome to my husband and my cottage at Nashville, where it is late spring, early summer, and I've been looking out the windows all day, and the garden is a bit overgrown, but the light is dappled and the wind has filled it with movement, and it's absolutely beautiful. I wish you were here. It is also the time when I am just beginning to have quite a lot of my own roses. If you're new here, welcome. I will tell you, I grow 35 varieties of heirloom roses and as much additional flowers and foliage for my own floristry as I can. So today we will be using garden roses. What else do I have in store for you? The thing I want to teach you today, and we will make it together in several iterations, is what I will call my two-ingredient miracle arrangement. And I should add to it in parentheses, 2 ingredients or more, because it is not a formula, it is not a prescription, it is certainly not a floral recipe. But what it is an idea. And if the idea is followed consistently and correctly, like any technique, it's only as good as adherence to it, it will never let you down. I will also tell you that I'm going to offer suggestions that I hope appeal to as wide a swathe of my audience as possible. What do I mean? I am often asked, is my teaching for amateurs or professionals? And to me, that is always a bit of a complicated question to answer, not because the answer is murky or difficult, but because where does one draw the line between professional and amateur? All that said, I am for mastery. Wherever you are in your floristry journey, I am for mastery, and if that interests you, you found the right place. I have not written the article yet, but I will write an article for Substack to accompany this film, and in it I will explore more of this question about mastery, amateurs, professionals, and so on. So please watch the film and check out my article on Substack. In the meanwhile, as you watch this film today, I'm going to ask you to please be slightly introspective and strategic. Almost everyone is a bit of both. Are you an amateur? Are you doing things at home, maybe even very well at home? Are you a professional? Do you want to elevate even extremely good work to extraordinary work? So maybe we're all a bit of both or different at different times, but think about which of those categories applies most to you. And then watch the film today, listening and watching for those bits of idea and instruction that apply most directly to you and your immediate interest. Watch the whole film through, and when you hear something that is maybe a bit more for the other interest, don't leave, don't be discouraged, and certainly don't become overwhelmed with information. I want to give you as much as I can, as freely as I can, and if you then come back and watch the film a second time or a third time, and you say, okay, I have primarily taken my keenest interest from it already, so now I can pick up other helpful bits and pieces. That's fantastic. I'm making these films so you can take a step, be it small or large, toward mastery, and I'm delighted to help you. So with that in mind, let me tell you how the idea for this arrangement came to me. Last fall, I visited my old college roommate. His name is Eric, and his wife and their 3 children. They had moved to a new home back in our college town after they'd been away for many years, and I was eager to see them and see their new home, and I had not met their youngest child yet, so it was, a multi-purpose visit, and you can imagine the frenetic activity in a house with 3 children, the oldest being age 3. And still, they managed, and I adore his wife, though with her degree of child rearing, I'm pretty sure that Eric was the one who took care of this. The house was still quite full of flowers, and they are all flowers that I know for sure he bought from a grocery store flower department. But because he had done certain things extremely well, they were pretty convincing. And let me say that if he can achieve that, anyone can achieve it. That is no insult to him. He's interested in art, and he's certainly traveled the world and seen many, many fine things. But he's no florist, and I've never known him to have a gardening bone in his body, and I've known him more than 20 years. So I started thinking, if he could do it, anyone could do it. And if I was going to give him just a little bit of advice that would exponentially improve what he was doing within the materials he had available to him, which are admittedly limited, and he certainly does not have a lot of time, and he doesn't have a huge collection of vases like I have, he doesn't have a lot of equipment or tools, so I started thinking, if I could give him just a few bits of advice that would exponentially elevate what he could do within his situation, that could also be helpful to many, many other people. So that's what we're going to do today. My 2-ingredient or more miracle vase arrangement. Please listen for the aspects of it that will help you the most and that answer the questions you have. Certainly with additional questions, pop them in the comments and I will respond to every single one of them. It might take me a moment, but I respond to all the comments. And in the meanwhile, settle in, refresh your drink. I'll be right back with a whole selection of vases to start talking with you about the starting point, how to choose the right vase. We'll see you then. Welcome back. Thanks for sticking around. And I have pulled a few vases from my collection of many, and I'm looking. They're still a bit dusty because they live on shelves. But like you, when I'm going to make an arrangement, the first thing to do is decide what sort of container I'll build it in. I don't know about where you live, but the tradition where I live for regular residential type floristry, flower arranging, and certainly not for particularly fine crystal vases and such, but just for miscellaneous glass, it seems to always around here live under people's sinks. And, maybe it's this sort of thing, maybe it's this sort of thing. I don't know if that's the tradition where you are, but if you don't know where to look for a vase, check under the sink. Now, I have many, many, many containers, and I have a lot of them in multiples for event work and large-scale entertaining. I also have things that aren't particularly vases, but sometimes I use them as vases. So we all have choice. If you're looking to start a vase collection, I strongly suggest you go to thrift stores, charity shops, that sort of thing, and just pop in often, and when you see something you like, for a few dollars, take it home. And it's no big risk. You've paid almost nothing for it. If it doesn't work terribly well, or you find one you like better, that's fine. You only have a few dollars in it, and as you get better vases that you use more regularly, maybe you donate the ones you started with. But how do we make a choice? When you have a lot of options, how do you make a choice? Well, let's start with this big tall one. We're doing a regular residential type arrangement today, and the idea is that it is about a size, which you'll see in a few minutes, that could go on a breakfast table or, as in the case of my old roommate, on a kitchen countertop. It might go on a credenza, sideboard. Maybe it goes, if you have a long vanity in a bathroom, maybe you have a desk and it goes on the corner of your desk. But, a substantial but manageable arrangement at home. So something this big, first of all, a general rule I will tell you is that the height of your vase is the starting point for determining the height of your arrangement. Very generally speaking, and there is wiggle room here, but if this is 18 inches tall, which I'm completely making up, then the height of your arrangement, to be proportionate and attractive in the finish, is going to be at least another 18 inches, and maybe as high as time and a half. the height of your vase. So maybe you're making an arrangement for a center table and an entry hall with a high ceiling, and this might work. But the other thing you have to always think about when choosing your container is your stem length. And when you are buying cut flowers, cut foliage, part of what you are paying for is the stem length. And if you are buying out of a grocery store, you will be hard-pressed to ever, unless it's maybe some gladioli, hard-pressed to ever find a length of stem that would allow you to create a proportionate arrangement in a vase of this height. So we're going to pass on this one for now. Put it as far out of the frame as I can. Now, let's look at this. A lot of people love a rose bowl. This is a particularly lovely one. You usually see them in just plain glass. And this one I have done at one of the crystal factories in Europe, but they don't cut it. They just send them as the body, and it's lovely. It's heavy. It's a much nicer quality than just, a cheap glass rose bowl. But what is this for? This is mostly for hand-tied bouquets that are bound with spiraled stems, and you have volume on top, and it tapers down to the binding point, and echoes the top shape in sort of an X across, and you need this width. But this width does you no good without that technique. So I would pass on this one too. Next, we've got these. These are quite similar. This one is slightly flared. And this is actually a crystal biscuit barrel. Probably Waterford in Lismore pattern, just looking at it. But this could work. But if you have something of this shape, it's important to remember the size of this opening is different than the size at the neck, which is smaller. And on one hand, this allows you to hold quite a lot of materials for the size, but the wider the opening, the more materials it can hold, the more materials it must hold, or else you will not be able to place your materials, your fresh cut stems, and keep them in place, because we are not using foam, we're not using tape, we're not using wire, none of that. We're just using stems and water and physics. Don't be afraid, I'll show you exactly what I mean. This is more or less the same, but it has the advantage of this slight flare, and it does not have a pinched neck. So this is getting us closer to something that might work very well. Just the same, this could work equally well. It's a little bigger. The mouth is a bit wider, so it will hold even more materials, and not only hold, but require. Always keep it in mind. Now, let's think about the height. What sort of stem length would you need to work in these? Could you find that stem length, for example, at a grocery store floral department? Definitely for this, yes. With this one, probably. So, these remain contenders. Now, the vase that my friend Eric used was about this shape. It was bigger than this, but it had this same flared shape, which was very attractive. It almost gives you, which I always think is quite beautiful. If you're from the American South, you'll know exactly what I mean, and if not, just Google it and you'll soon see. It gives you almost, with the stems coming up, a crepe myrtle effect, a beautifully pruned crepe myrtle tree effect. You have a canopy of foliage and flowers, and then the stems come together here. The disadvantage of this shape, particularly at this smaller size, is this holds very little water, and your flowers and foliage can drink quite quickly, particularly as we're going into the warm weather months. So, this has its limitations, but also its benefits. I would not be as inclined to choose this over something closer to these. So, let's continue. What is your thought with this? It has some things I like. It's rather pretty pink glass. It's a relatively classic urn form. But really, if you look closely, it has the same concern as this, which is the pierced neck. If we had this whole opening to work within, that might give us something rather nice. But because this neck chokes the amount of flowers you can hold, This is limiting. Also, it's deceptively small. If you have a good number of stems in this container, there's very little room remaining for water. So that is always something to keep in mind. I still think our strongest contenders are here. And for something totally different and a splash of color, maybe you have an old crock. Maybe it's a bit more formal porcelain. Maybe it is slightly different shape, different glaze. None of that matters. I want to point out that this looks like a big container. Oh, what a big floristry container. And the first thought, other than color, is what stem length would you need to work in this in the style I'm going to propose today? But, like I have shown you on the others, we have a common theme. Look how small. The opening is really not here. The opening is this inner ring, this much smaller actual mouth. And that gives you some limitations. In old crockery, even glazed, very often the glaze leaks. So if you go out in thrift shops, in charity shops, antique stores, and you find something you dearly love, test it before you arrange in it and put it on your fine veneered table and then find later that it is ruined with heartache because the glaze was not completely watertight. So, of all of these, I could well use this and be very happy with what I have in terms of fresh cut materials today. I could also be happy with this, and what I'm going to show you is a bit of a hybrid. It's this shape, closer to this size, and I will be right back to show you exactly how we're going to do it. Hello, with a bounty of beautiful roses and some foliage. Also, I have the vase here that we're going to start with. This is what I've chosen. This is a kind of commercial quality of crystal glass, although I'd probably just call it glass. It is sold as crystal glass, and it is made by a company called St. George, and they were originally made as candle hurricanes, made and marketed as candle hurricanes. But I have amassed quite a large collection out of junk shops and antique malls and such, because they have all the advantages of the vase shape I was just praising. They're a good height for, as I said, sideboards and such. I use this size for event work, maybe not as a centerpiece per se, but if you have long banquet tables, one of these as the occasional centerpiece, no more than 30% of this higher size and shape, in addition to 60+% lower ones. This does give a bit of variety that looks awfully good when you survey a room on whole. But I have these in two patterns. I've got this pattern, and then I have one that is more simply cut, and of course I can use them together or separately. And it is a shape that works so darn well. You might even call it a single bottle wine or champagne cooler shape and proportion to give you an idea of exactly the size. So as you see, here I have a duplicate, and in it I have started the arrangement I'm going to show you today. And I have built the foundation using a technique that is simple but has some nuance to it. So instead of showing you exactly how I do it here, I'm going to refer you on this one point to my website, mathertonbaber.com. From the main menu, select Learn Online, and this technique for creating the foliage base with no wires, foam, tape, none of that, I teach as one of the 3 techniques in my vase arranging class. This is a marvelous technique that I have developed over 30 years of floristry. I have never seen anyone do exactly this, but it is not just plunk, 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 stems in and hope for the best. This gives you a durable structure, almost a brush of foliage, if you will, to insert stems into such that they stay where you put them. And I will tell you how I got the idea for this foliage base. I learned sort of a rudimentary version of it from an old head gardener who had worked at quite a few of the great country houses of England. And he was a very young man, just after World War II, learning the gardening trade from the then old-timers. And when I say old-timers, I mean gardeners who had begun their careers properly in the Victorian age, Victorian country house gardens and such. So it was the head gardener's responsibility in many of these houses to decorate the house interior with flowers and foliage from the garden. And of course, this was before the advent of floral foam, wet foam, which, as I've said, we do not use for a variety of reasons. At least I don't. So he was showing me a method, and it gave me this idea. As I said, vase arranging class on my website for all the details. The important thing for this 2-ingredient notion is that this is what I would call a sturdy structural foliage. What do I mean? Well, if you had a long, linear, kind of wispy foliage, even if you used the same technique, it would look, as my husband aptly said recently, like a pound of raw spaghetti noodles just tossed into a tall vase. They would just be a bunch of sticks. You want both this fullness, and you want to use a foliage that can not only stand on its own, but support the weight of the flowers that you will insert. So let's talk about those flowers. We'll be back to this in a minute. You want, particularly for a luxury flower look, in today's world, a lot of people want the luxurious look of high-end flowers. What you want is not, again, skinny little wisps of flowers. I would put in that category something like Veronica, even if you have a long stem and then a bit of something on the end like Nigella, that visually fills no space at all. And if one thing looks chintzy in all of floristry, and you see it too commonly, it is these arrangements, be them small or large, and you can see straight through them, and there are no sizable blooms whatsoever. It's more air than floristry. And certainly, in the canon of design, there is a wonderful role, essential role, of negative space. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about sometimes many, many hundreds of stems, and they're all so skinny they amount to nothing. I particularly see it even among people I admire greatly in the flower farming world, and they are so proud of all these varieties they've grown. They're so impressive. I could never do all that flower farming. But they are used in combination only with other linear forms, and it visually looks like, as the French famously say, a fistful of weeds. So to avoid that, you have to have visual volume. We have started with this visual volume of foliage, and I have chosen to accompany it the most beautiful garden roses. They are fragrant too. If you're only going to have 2 ingredients, that is one of my top tips. One of them, it could be the flowers, it could be the foliage, but at least one of them should be fragrant. What do I have in my own garden that could be used in this manner that is fragrant? Probably top of the list would be bay laurel. If you're cutting bay laurel, I hope you have a big tree of it, because even this amount taken from a small pot would be noticeable. But it does have a delicious scent, and it is structural and hefty in exactly the way we need here. So, back to my roommate. What had he done well? He had used only roses in his arrangement, but he used 3 varieties, and they were all similar but different, and that's essential to this method. The first essential element is this structural foliage. And you see that I have followed the rule I gave you earlier. The total height is about double the height of the container, and I will add to that the width is about equal to the height. Think about a square, about as wide as high, and that gives you a beautiful, balanced, proportionate finish every time. So, the foliage is essential, and these large, not only large heads, but large faced flowers are the other essential element. Now, maybe you don't have 3 different varieties of roses. Let's say you only buy one. What is important? If you only have one, do your best to choose a rose that is bicolored. That means in one bloom, you have at least two colors. These are slightly bicolor. The more they open, the more they're fading. But as you see, and I've got some old petals to remove here, you have a lighter pink-white on the outside and you have a darker pink on the inside. Why does that matter? If you use a rose that is all monochromatic, all one color, you add multiples of that rose and all you gain is a bigger volume of that one color. But look here in this vase, this bucket, it's not a vase, you see these are all one variety. But because the centers are darker and the outer petals are lighter and they are graded in color through the opening of the bloom, it gives you visual variety and interest, even within that one variety. So one variety is perfectly fine, but choose a bicolor when you can. That's essential. I have not used dramatically bicolored roses here because it's not what I have. But what I have used is two different roses that are similar but different in another way. They are garden roses of a generally similar shape. They open with this similarly fabulous multi-petal interior. And I still am working with a two-color concept. I've got a pale pink and a pale yellow. Are there some roses that are pale pink and pale yellow in one bloom? Yes, I grow the peace rose, for example. That's a wonderful example. I have another one that is almost bare cream, but slightly more white and pink. I think it's called painted porcelain. Anyway, you get the idea. You want a color contrast because that amplifies the visual impact of the flowers you're using. And I cannot reiterate strongly enough, use blooms with a large face so that they fill visual volume in the arrangement. Now, I am not good at arranging upside down and backwards, as some YouTubers are very clever at doing. So I'm going to turn this around. I'm not going to make a fully three-sided arrangement because I want to keep the impact of those big blooms in the front so you can see exactly what I mean. So I'm going to leave the camera running, and if it gets a bit boring feeling when I go back in the editing, I might speed it up in places. But stick around, I'll show you exactly what I do and how it turns out. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back. Thanks for watching. I could continue if I wanted to use all of these roses here, but I just want to give you the idea because this is the two-ingredient version. So let me tell you a bit about what I did. I wanted to work within the overall proportions I created with the foliage. And what you don't want to do when you are working with contrasting colored flowers is create an unnatural looking repeating pattern. There's one of the great royal warrant holding florists in London that calls it a checkerboard, if we were in this case to have cream, pink, cream, pink. As many people who have a typical floristry background might be tempted to do, because they are very often taught to put a central focal flower and then around that a triangle of three of something and then the alternating triangle of three something else. And it starts to look extremely inorganic very quickly. So don't do that. Follow your instinct. Truth to nature, as I always say, if you don't know what looks natural, go have a walk outside and look around. But you also have to think about and this is slightly woo-woo, but stick with me on it, what an old florist friend of mine called the emotion of composition. You have to think about if these materials were growing together, how they would grow. And the most helpful hint I can give you for any flower that has a long stem and then essentially a ball on the top, like a mass or focal flower, we call that. For example, it's easy to see. You can tell that this stem bends slightly to my right, your left. So when I insert that, if I was inserting it here, for example, I'll do it from the side so you can see. I would insert it so that it is the slight bend bends the bloom up as if it's growing to the sun. Many, many people have an instinct to put things in like this, so they're falling out. That makes even the most high quality, beautifully conditioned flower seem like it's suffering, dead, on its way to being dead, something like that. If you're a professional especially, you never ever want your client to assume that something you have provided them is suffering. Also, if you're just arranging flowers for yourself at home, this is less beautiful and inspiring than this. I hope that's plain for you to see. And I hope you can also see how by simply inserting these with those few guidelines in mind. No, here on YouTube demo, I probably have not finished this to a standard that I would otherwise, but I'm going to compare this to what I show you next. This is what we'll call the 2-ingredient miracle. Now, I said it would be 2 ingredients in parentheses or more. So following this same idea, same technique, I'm going to show you with a few additional ingredients what a dazzling arrangement you can just as easily make. I'll be right back. Hello. Thanks very much for coming back for more. Boy, as you see, I have additional ingredients, and it probably looks like an avalanche of them, but it's really not. The foliage, you probably want to know, is salal. Lemon leaf, Gualtheria shallon is the botanic name. It is easy to get here in North America. In fact, I often hear from florist colleagues in Britain in particular that they are quite envious of this because either they can't get it or the quality of it is not the same. And it is an absolute staple for me because the leaf is not all that different from rose foliage, and for that matter, quite a lot of other foliage. And it lasts and lasts. It has never, in 30 years of using it, ever let me down. And this time of year, you see it has these little buds, which will open into tiny, tiny, tiny little blooms and give you a bit of additional interest. Just be sure it does not fall into your vase or bucket water because they will introduce a lot of bacteria and rot quickly and spoil your vase life. But this is salal. Here I have waxflower, chamulosium. I have chosen this fuchsia color because it is more vibrant than this green, but the overall color saturation, intensity is about the same, yet this is, as I was talking about earlier, bicolor. This has many, many shades of green and fuchsia in it, and it also echoes the particular pink in this beautiful garden rose. So I am merely using this filler, we would certainly classify this as a filler material, to augment the fullness of the look we're creating in the vase within the color harmony, the pink and yellow, pink and cream idea that we've already decided. And then I'm going to introduce some of my own homegrown beautiful ivy. And boy, I cut a lot of it, so I'll have to sort through it as I go. So why have I chosen these two, other than the color? If you are only going to have 4 ingredients, so we're going from 2 ingredients to 4. If you went from just 2, the foliage and the flowers, to 3, the next one I would add is some kind of filler. You will see why, because I'm going to add that next and just show you the effect. Then I will add the roses and show you the effect. Then I will add the ivy. If you're going to add a fourth ingredient, choose something viney and trailing. That is where you do a lot of good very easily by growing a bit of your own detail. Maybe it's ivy, maybe it's clematis, maybe it's honeysuckle, maybe it's jasmine. There are a lot of viney things that you might use that perform quite well as a cut flower. But nothing adds a gardeny feel more than a bit of leggy vine. And it also helps join visually the arrangement to the container. And if you continue a bit down onto the surface, the container to the resting place, the tabletop, wherever your arrangement is going to exist. So, I also brought some other garden roses here. I'm not going to use this one in this arrangement, but this is one of my husband's favorites. It's called Fragrant Cloud. It's a huge bloom, highly, highly scented. And I just wanted to show you that if you had a bloom this size, think of how few it would take to make an extremely opulent impression. Not very many at all. But conversely, this is also a fabulous rose that I grow. This is called, getting a thorn in my thumb is what it's called. This is called Souvenir de President Lincoln. It's a French bourbon rose. Clearly, I'm going to use just these two stems in this arrangement as punctuation because this fabulous sort of magenta fuchsia is just so good with the Chamaelosium. So, like anything in life, yes, there are recipes, yes, there are formulas, but when you learn an idea that you can adapt to your situation, your materials, the time you have to create an arrangement, an idea, a technique, and learning a bit of skill to execute it consistently well is worth far more than someone who says 2 anemone and 3 ranunculus and 5 roses or whatever their recipe might be. So, I'm going to insert these stems with the same technique that I used on the previous arrangement. I'm going to strip any foliage that will fall below the waterline. I'm going to look for a curve in the stem and insert the stem so the curve angles up as if the material is growing to the sun. And I will pause to show you what we've done along the way. Stay tuned. And here we have it. I have slightly woven in, but basically just with the same insertion technique I showed you before, evenly but naturally placed this wax flower filler through the foliage base. Now, if you were, let's say, doing some event floristry, even at home, and you want flowers in the house, but you don't have the budget to fill the whole house with big sumptuous garden roses, for example, something like this certainly maybe is not in your accessibility, you might do an arrangement like this, maybe with some eucalyptus for scent and a silvery color, and then put these arrangements that are visually full, they're not wispy, they look opulent, but they're not full of expensive flowers. And you might place those at more distant areas, at the end of a long corridor, in a bedroom that maybe most people won't see. You can really pad, I hate to use that word, but you can supplement the fine floristry that's at touch points where every single guest will appreciate them. With this sort of thing at a distance, you could stop right here and have something extremely useful for exactly that purpose. But today, I'm showing you 4 ingredients. So here we have 2, and now I'll proceed with inserting the garden roses. Stay tuned. Welcome back again. Now, my word, what have we done here? I'm seeing that this one has slightly slipped from where I wanted it. There, it's probably happy there. Look at this. Isn't this fantastic? And this does not feel piecey. This does not feel like someone grew and arranged a collection of sticks. This feels opulent. So, have a look. Think of how you might do something like this for yourself. I want you to note that when you create an arrangement that is height and width proportionate, and you cannot just see straight through it. You know, this is not that kind of example I gave of what not to do in the beginning. This suddenly feels like a much bigger arrangement. Yes, I have used rather extravagant materials in the roses only. But because the roses are superb, they elevate everything else, creating an arrangement of visual size and actual value. Hello, welcome back. Thanks for sticking around. You'll see we're losing a little bit of daylight. It's actually beautiful twilight outside. I hope you can still get a little sunlight on these flowers for color. But my word, I have added the garden roses. You see, I put my Souvenir de President Lincoln, just 2 small sprays. One here, which you can't see, but you will see when it opens, and one here. Isn't this beautiful? And I have put it in context so that when viewed at this height, which you should always aim to view arranged flowers slightly from above, every single person that sees it cannot miss that superb little bloom. Small but mighty. So, this is a 3-ingredient miracle, really. We've got roses, we've got a bit of wax for filler, wax flower, and the lemon leaf. My word. If I can do it, really, you can do it too. And as you saw from how I worked, when I inserted the stems, yes, sometimes the stem has, you know, a bit of a bend where it grew, or you're hitting another stem in the vase. But pretty much, the stems stayed where I put them because of the technique I used to build this foliage base. You will also notice about the base, it looks natural, and yet basically symmetrical, and I do it such that as you go all the way around, the top side of the leaf is facing the sun, facing up, just like it would be growing on the plant. That is a unique feature of my technique. And boy, the brain knows when something looks natural. So let's add the 4th ingredient, and I will show you the finished look. I've got ivy here, and as you see, my ivy needed a bit of cutting, and I really went for it. So I've got some of these less than beautiful sprays. Maybe I can trim them to look really great. Some of them I'll just have to simply sort through. It will take a moment, so I'll speed that up as well. I'll be right back. How about that? I must have only added 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe 3 or 4 more in the front. Let's call it under 10 stems of ivy. And look at this sumptuous garden look. Now, for comparison, clean my table slightly. For comparison, I'm going to move this here. I'm going to bring the 2-ingredient original back so you can see them side by side. Boy, I had here, not counting my 2 little sprays of these fuchsia roses, just of the main pink and cream roses, I had 2 dozen. In fact, I broke a stem earlier, so I had 23. Look what I have done, and you can do as well, with just 23 stems of something really special. If you use the right shape and scale of flower with the right hardiness and composition of foliage, by adding a filler and a bit of trailing interest, you can go from something extremely lovely. This is a far cry above what most people are arranging at home. This is a far cry above what most people are arranging in even good shops. And with just a little bit more effort, a few more materials, you can do something that I hope excites you as much as it does me. With that, I'm sure this has been a bit of a long film, so I will wrap it up. Thanks for watching. Of course, none of these materials perform like this without selection, very careful selection, and conditioning. That's how we prepare the cut flowers to thrive in the vase for as long as possible. To know all about that, mathertonbaber.com, my website. From the menu, learn live and look at my cutting and conditioning class. Of course, I already mentioned my vase arranging class. Should you want to use, for your large, interesting, voluminous blooms, hydrangea, I also have an excellent, relatively brief hydrangea class that will fix you right up. Thanks for watching. I'm going to photograph these now, and I'll put some still photos at the end so you can see all the beautiful detail that may be lost in the overall frame. Thanks for watching. Give it a try. Let me know how you do in the comments. See you soon.